Now, September marks Heritage Month and is a time to reflect on the many things that make us uniquely South African, but it's also Tourism Month. This year's Heritage Month finds cultural activity in South Africa at a dejected state, some say. Thanks to COVID-19, morale is low. During the era of the Government of National Unity, culture was used as a tool to foster social cohesion, nation building and reconciliation. Now, to ensure that no sector of South African society was offended or excluded, former President Nelson Mandela decided to retain the apartheid-era protea and springbok emblems for our national cricket and rugby teams, respectively. Using his powers of persuasion, it was said that Madiba ensured that colonial and apartheid-era statues and monuments were retained in public spaces. To talk about the state of heritage and tourism sectors, especially as they're intertwined, Omar Badsha is the founder of SA History Online. Dr. Mabuyi Gumede is a senior lecturer in culture and tourism at UKZN. We're also joined by Michelle Constant, a colleague of mine, SAFM presenter, expert in arts and culture, board member of SA Tourism. A very good evening to all of you, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Tsipisa.
Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you.
And I would also, just as we continue with our conversation, like to acknowledge the literature of Sonwabile Mangotwa, who's recently written about this very issue, and some of the questions that we'll borrow from his writ tonight. So let's just first start with the state of our foremost heritage sites. We know that Lily's Leaf has come onto the spotlight because it was forced to close its doors permanently due to a lack of funding. Let's start with you, Mr. Badsha. What are your thoughts about why we find ourselves in the position that we're in? Some say it's COVID, but we know that some of these problems are long-standing. Omar Badsha, are you still with us?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Was that directed at?
Yes, I
me?
said yes. I did say that.
No, I think that funding is not the issue, but it is an issue for institutions, cultural institutions and organizations. Heritage is an ongoing and a dynamic entity that we all sort of talk about, but we don't really begin to ask the more fundamental questions. Is that how is our heritage, how do we create a new national heritage, which is inclusive? And when we look at what has happened since 1994, we will find that we have departments of arts and culture in the provinces and nationally. And the one thing that is very evident, that they lack a sense of what would go together to make up heritage. In fact, they lack imagination and a proper way of running and a clean government. And so, like everything else that we've built in the last 20 years, it has now come to a point where it has affected all aspects of our life, from the cultural to the very daily survival of people. And so essentially for us, the only thing that we can talk about and be proud about is our struggle and for liberation, our struggle for democracy and constitutionalism, fair play, and non-racialism. And that should actually unite us, but that's still a long, long way to go.
All right.
Because our institutions do not support those values, and institutions have actually undermined the program and policies that were set up in the early 1990s. And so we are in a crisis, but the crisis has been compounded by climate change and the impact that it has on all aspects of life on the planet. And we've seen overnight cities being wiped out by flooding, and the most incredible heritage, European heritage,
right,
like the Venice.
And I want us to get into that, Mr. Badsha, in just a moment, because you are raising quite a number of important myriad points. But let me come to you, Dr. Gumede, your thoughts on why we find ourselves where we are, and the framework that was built around our heritage sites. Particularly, was there any thought about who the custodians are and whether it reflects them, and what does it mean to reflect them?
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. All I can say is that, yes, it's true that COVID-19 has had a negative impact on the tourism sector due to its lockdown rules that do not permit large gatherings. And we know when we talk about culture and heritage, we are talking mainly about having people, a large group of people gathering together to enjoy the culture, to enjoy the heritage. And again, on-site visits were limited, which also put a halt on international visits also. Again, the stopping of international travel created some sort of an opportunity for us as a country, South Africa, to perhaps think of innovative ways to do tourism and to do our culture and to do our heritage. Unfortunately, COVID-19 did not give us enough time to think properly. So as a sector, we're just supposed to just think on our feet and come up with innovative ways that operate online and perhaps, but as bad as COVID-19 was, more especially on the business, but it also helped us as the business sector to be creative, to be innovative. And it also helped us to focus more on our domestic tourism, because the restrictions for the longest of times, the restrictions were mainly on international visits and international tourists to visit our country. But then when COVID-19 came into force, it then forced us as the South African country, as the South Africans, to focus more and develop our domestic tourism. All I can say is that for those that are in this business, I know it's not easy due to all restrictions, due to all the lockdown restrictions and stuff. But all that I can say is that let us be innovative, let us be positive about this, and let us try to think on our feet, and let us not allow COVID-19 to stop us.
All right, thanks for that, Dr. Gumede. And Ms. Constant, will come to you, and we'll come back to the innovative ways and the bedrock of that in just a moment. But I'd like to, especially for you, to take us through the years of how museums, some of these tourism sites and how they operate has changed. So it's been said that the white paper on our transitional policy framework only dealt with the reconfiguration of apartheid and homeland cultural institutions. So the continued funding of the arts, and mainly the performing arts, were predominantly white and had served only a minority of South African citizens. So to expand that and make them inclusive, how has that change occurred, and has it been able to take us along as South Africans in our individual spaces?
Thank you, Tshepiso, and you really don't need to call me Miss Constant. It's Michelle.
Just for uniformity, I can't call you Michelle.
Tshepiso, I think that white paper is long gone. We're now over 2 decades, well over 2 decades into our democracy. There is a new white paper that sits on the table and remains to be resolved and finalized. So we wait for that in anticipation. But I think that there's something that Omar noted, and I really believe it is something that is absolutely critical in the way we move forward into the future. And I would prefer to say futures, because I think if you're going to strategize, you want to start thinking about diverse futures. There's not simply one future. So Omar used the word imagination. And if we're going to look at tourism and culture and heritage, they're all forms of storytelling which focus specifically on using memory and imagination. And I think, and very strongly, reimagination as well. And I think that if we are going to move forward, whether we move forward with regards to museums, whether we have to address issues of funding, we have to take a point of imagination and thinking and rethinking quite critically and creatively what the opportunities are. My colleague Mabuyi, Dr. Mabuyi has noted quite clearly that we do need to be innovative, but we need to address that innovation in a variety of spaces, be that the economy, the cultural and arts sector, be that in the tourism sector. We need to start thinking about how imagination and collaboration can work as we move forward. I think there's a lot of time that is spent about looking at the past, and ultimately that's what heritage is. But heritage in many ways is also about how we engage with the future.
And Michelle, allow me to interrupt you and say, and I'll give all of you an opportunity to ask this. You're absolutely right, imagination, but it's about the prism from which you see it, right? So that's why I'm asking, yes, let's look at the past. How have we gotten to this point? Because our knowledge sources would also inform in what direction we use our imagination and where we spread it to.
Yeah, so if you don't mind me, Tsepiso, I will jump in and I'll say, how have we got to this point? Personally, I believe we've got to this point because we have not allowed children. Our binding constraint is early childhood development, without a doubt. And if we do not engage with children and their imaginations and the concept of play and the concept of how they engage with their world, their heritage, their future, all of those things, we will never, ever be able to get this right as part of our national storytelling as we move forward. It goes all the way back to our education system, particularly our early childhood development education system, ECD. That would be my comment about how we got here. We don't have it in schools.
So if you don't all mind my using...
We don't have arts education in schools. Very few schools have it nowadays. It's a real issue.
Okay, so if you don't mind my using first names, as Michelle has said. So Omar, then let me come to you. You mentioned the fact that our approach has been Eurocentric. So what has stopped us from approaching it through the ideologues or ideologies of your Ngugi wa Thiong'o, for instance, and Professor Wale Serote? How have we shaped it, and have we sought the counsel of these great figures in literature that we stop or prevent making heritage such an abstract thing for our communities?
No, I think that Wale Serote and all the other very important people who played and continue to play a role in shaping our thinking, most of it, that thinking is limited to a very small percentage of our population. You know, we are facing a crisis where in the schools, the last 2 years, more people, a lot of young children are dropping out of school. Because of poverty and other aspects of the shutdown. And we are losing, it's going to take another generation or two for us to be able to have children in school that remain and go up to matric and universities. You know, the dropout rate in our schools is terrible. And so we are faced with a real tragedy in the making, in that we fought for a better education, a better society, but the institutions are not working. Our institutions are not working, and our educational institutions are in a dire state. There's not enough. If you want to talk about transmission of culture and also making people aware of heritage. That's where we start. Other than the museums, when children come to the museums, they're already coming with, if they have a proper education, with a lot of information already to be able to interpret what is happening in those institutions. Or if they go to a play, they would begin to understand. But at the moment, 2/3 of our populations are cut off from that. Yeah. And so then what is worse is that this has been the crisis in our schools go hand in hand with violence, an enormous amount of violence and anger. Part of our heritage, we need to be able to draw on our past to be able to relook at how to deal with anger and violence. And we are a society that coming out of colonialism and apartheid, and some of the instruments and institutions that we set up are not doing the work of healing that past or understanding that past and building on that past.
So, Mabuyi, from your experience, are we involving the communities, which is one of the first questions I asked, the role of communities, and you spoke about being inventive. So on the one hand, we have these heritage sites seen as almost a privilege because some of them are free, some of them are not. How do we take the tangible and intangible, make them one, not only beyond an educational tool, but something that creates a source of associations for South Africans in general and not separation?
No, thank you very much, ma'am. I'm going to start by saying that before 1994, the focus of heritage was mainly on tangible heritage. And this form of heritage was mainly concerned with the heritage of the minority group. And nobody at all was concerned about the heritage of the previously disadvantaged until after 1994, when the government of the Democratic Government of South Africa then decided to acknowledge and recognize the history and the culture and the heritage of the previously disadvantaged people by coming out with a project that was known as the National Legacy Project. Yes, they started in consulting with various communities that came forward to say that, yes, in our locality we have heritage that we think needs recognition of some sort. Amongst these projects that found their way into the National Legacy Project, there was the Albert D. Tuli Women's Monument, Nelson Mandela, and others. But these projects had great intentions because they were meant to commemorate the heritage of the previously disadvantaged. They were meant to address the past inequalities. They were meant to create unity and reconciliation, more especially between the whites and blacks of South Africa that have always been at war. As much as the democratic government embarked on that journey to try and create reconciliation between these two groups, but the heritage here in South Africa is still not sustainable. It is still not sustainable and will never be sustainable if the local communities are still excluded from decision making, and when tourism is taking, as much as it is taking place in their locality, but is not contextualized, it is not contextualized around their cultures, around their heritage, around their customs and traditions. So if it carries on like that, it means that tourism will always be something that they seem not to be understanding. Why? Because tourism seems to be working in isolation from them. Tourism is not considering their indigenous knowledge. Tourism is not giving them a space to talk openly about the issues. Why? Because most of the time they are not involved in this tourism and in heritage. So all that I can say is that heritage will never be sustainable if the local communities are not part of it, if the local communities do not benefit from it, if the local communities are not involved in decision making. Because if they are involved, they are going to take responsibility, they are going to be accountable, they are also going to take ownership of the resources that are needed for tourism to take place. In short, all that I'm trying to say is that, yes, unfortunately, the local communities are still not involved in tourism. Some of them just work there, just doing mere work that does not even improve their lives. But their culture, their heritage, their customs, their traditions are not part of the tourism that we are talking about. And it always makes it strange to them. Okay. They seem not to be understanding it. Why? Because it is not contextualized around their everyday life, around their culture, around
Mabuyi, allow me to please ask,
and around the indigenous knowledge that they have about all those herbs that are there, all those trees that are there, and they don't even worry even if social ills like poaching, environmental problems like poaching are taking
Dr.
place.
Mabuyi, if you could please allow me, because we are running out of time, I need to ask Michelle this question before we run out of time. So COVID-19, we know, has brought into the spotlight the funding crisis, but if we are going to reposition the heritage sector as economic and strategic assets, how will we do that then within this current context, borrowing from what Mabuyi was saying? So, for instance, you've done a lot of work in the performance arts, and depending on the communities from which you are from, it's not seen as something that you can make a living off or teach others from. Should we be looking at more public-private partnerships? Should the state cede control over some of these heritage sites?
Oh, this is an entire essay. I do believe there should be more public-private partnerships, but when I say that, I understand the challenges of it currently given COVID. So I think that there needs to, I certainly believe that our government needs to pay serious focus on the arts and culture sector and the tourism sector right now. I believe that there are the two sectors that have received a serious battering during COVID. I was thinking about it yesterday and just saying, frankly, it is a numbers game. And if it means that, for example, we have to open theatres and bars and clubs and the like with vaccine passports, I'm totally in on it. On a broader idea, yes, I think public-private partnerships are critical, but then you need to be able to show the value. You can't simply expect the private sector to say, well, yeah, let's partner here unless it aligns with their purpose as well. And I think that that's a strategic positioning that we need to see very strongly taking place in the arts and culture sector, that they start to be able to show the metrics and the value of what it is that they do. And I'm not simply talking about the value of numbers. I'm talking about the value of creativity, the value of emotional intelligence, and the value of cultural intelligence as well.
Right. I'm not sure what's happening with Dr. Mabuyi's line or connection. Hopefully we still have her. So because we have run out of time, if I could just ask you to all briefly, moving forward, how do we rediscover our identities through these heritage and tourism sites, and who should lead it? Should be at national, provincial or local government level? Let me start with you, Mr. Omar.
Well, I think that, broadly speaking, we have a very, very good policy position in that we continuously argued that what we need is from community-based groups being given support in developing arts and culture and conserving the heritage sites in their communities. And so we have to go back as Ms. Gumede said, is we have to get back to the community and to get their buy-in and get their support to be able to ensure that arts and culture starts there and cultural activity starts among younger people. And in that process, you are going to be able to create a more vibrant arts and cultural economy. Let me put, I hate to use the word economy.
All right, Dr.
But that is what it is. And part of it is that it's an economy that employs a lot of people, but arts and culture has another role.
All right. Dr. Mabuyi, I'm going to have to move on to you. As I said, we have run out of time. Very briefly.
Ma'am, I do not know. Excuse me, ma'am.
Yes, Dr.
Excuse
Mabuyi.
me, ma'am.
Yes, Dr.
I don't know what has happened to my phone. I can hardly hear a thing.
Okay.
Will you please give me quickly the...
All right, we're going to have to move on.
I can log in on my phone.
All right, we're going to have to move on. We're going to take a quick break. Do stay with us.